We interrupt our program to bring you a special broadcast.
Boom! Headshot!
Hey, it's Clay. How you guys doing? I got another Battlefield 3 video for you. This time I want to talk about weapons, and specifically weapon variety. I'm playing this. This is a match of Rush on Aftermath. Still absolutely loving it. Probably going to be playing Rush for a long, long time. This DLC has been amazing. To be completely honest, this DLC in some ways has breathed a whole new light into Aftermath for me, and this may be a stretch to say, but I might just go ahead and do it and say that it almost makes the game worth it itself. It pays for the $60 in itself, and even at that point, it's hard to quantify it, but to even go so far to say that it was worth the entire money that you would pay for the expansion packs, it might be. I mean, these maps are really good. These Rush maps play really well. I'm having a ton of fun, so take that for what it's worth. But no more of that. I want to talk about weapons. I want to talk about weapon variety. In this game, I'm using the Spaz 12, and then later I switched to the M16, where I feel like I really need to start going tryhard. And, specifically with weapon variety, I want to ask this question. Is it good to have a wide variety of weapons? Is it good to have a wide variety of weapon customization? And I kind of think that both of those are in some ways related, because some games use weapon variety as just a means to an end in terms of weapon customization. You're just kind of reskinning the same weapon. So think about the AK-74M and the L85. Those two assault rifles are almost identical rates of fire, almost identical recoil patterns. Just they have different skins. They're extremely similar. But is that a good thing? This has kind of been one of the things, the evolutions of the modern FPS is to really push the boundaries of weapon customization and player customization, variety, having all these sorts of different ways to kind of play. But you're still playing the same type of game, but you just have a lot of variety in terms of what you use as your killing tool. And I was kind of reflecting today on some of the classics, games like Counter-Strike, COD 4, Halo. A lot of these older games really, when it really boils down to it, were extremely simple in terms of weapons. In a game like Counter-Strike, you had the AK and the M4, which in some ways, and I know that there are differences, but they kind of function the same. Your high damage, high skill assault rifle. The Deagle, the AWP, and really outside of that, maybe you'd see an MP5 in competitive play, when they wanted to save money, but I don't know, really those weapons defined the competitive Counter-Strike play. And look at a game like Halo 3, the battle rifle, the sniper rifle, the shotgun. You have these very core, basic weapons that really, really drove competitive play in many regards. And, it's interesting to see these modern developers really push the boundaries in terms of weapon customization and what you can all do. It's very, very interesting to me. And in some ways, I think it's good, but I also think that it is not necessarily something that as a community we should just accept and take, point blank. Because I think that a lot, think about Counter-Strike. Did anyone complain about weapon balance in Counter-Strike? Yeah, sure they did, but it's different. It was very different. Weapon balance, the discussion about weapon balance is very different when your core weapon usage is so different. And when you introduce other mechanics, you have powerful weapons, but they're more expensive or they're harder to get. In Halo, it's difficult to go and get the sniper because they put it in a difficult place. You have these other ways of balancing weapons other than just with their pure statistics. And in some ways, I think that creates a little bit more of a pure gameplay experience. It's a little bit more of a straightforward, you're not so much worrying about, are the weapons balanced, or do all these weapons fit together? You're more worrying about just straight up skill, just shooting the other guy more effectively than he shoots you. You know exactly what his capabilities are. You don't have to keep track of, was that an AK, or is that an AN-94, or is that an AEK? You've got, it's much more straightforward. And And I do realize that on the flip side, now look at like the Close Quarters DLC. I would say that it was in itself worth it to introduce the new weapons. I think that look at the effect that the new weapons had on the Battlefield 3 community. I mean, it was like a lightning rod when all those new weapons were available, and people were really testing them out, making a ton of videos explaining all the stats, comparing them with the current crop, talking about whether or not they will really add anything. I mean, it was really interesting. And I think it did a lot for the YouTube community to have so much variety and so much, just this new breed of weapons breathed a new sign of life into the game. And looking at the Call of Duty franchise, they just released an expansion pack for the first time where they added a weapon, the Peacekeeper, and it's interesting. It's really interesting to see the way that the community has really latched onto it, and it's been very, very interesting. So for a developer standpoint, to bring in new weapons throughout the game's life cycle, and it really does a lot. And think about something like League of Legends, where they're releasing new champions, which in some ways kind of function like there's kind of a parallel there between first-person shooters' weapon choice and the champion choice in League of Legends. They release new champions almost on a bi-monthly, every 3 weeks basis, and it really does a lot to, when a new champion is released, people are really curious to get their hands on it to see what it feels like, how it plays, how does it compare to other champions, because you still have the basic roles. You have your AD carry, AP carry, tank, support, and bruiser, jungler. You've got these basic roles, but you have these different champions that kind of provide a little bit of a variation, if that makes sense, a little bit of a tweak to the classic formula. And I think that it's really, really curious to see how modern shooters have really drifted in this direction, where you want weapon variety. Think about something like Blacklight Retribution, just the raw amount of customization for your weapon. It's really interesting, and you have all these build guides that people get really interested in, and it really does a lot to grow the game and to provide this the Call of Duty with the Pick 10 system, Battlefield 3 with the new weapons that released. All these games are really, really pushing to expand the weapon base, and provide more customization, more options, more choices for the player. And I think that's a good choice. But from from the perspective of the classics, it's impossible to deny how pure that gameplay was, how straightforward it was, and in some ways it made it more competitive. It was more focused on skill and in your movement, your positioning, your ability to control recoil. Those things come in more into play rather than, oh, he's using an OP weapon. And I think it's an interesting discussion, and I think that I don't necessarily think that as a community we should wholeheartedly just kind of jump ship to this new paradigm and say, we want lots of weapons, we want lots of customization. Because I think that it makes it more difficult for the developer to balance it. I think it makes it more difficult to have that more skill-based gameplay, which I am a huge proponent of skill-based gameplay. I really think that a core tenet of a first-person shooter is that it should, in all instances, reward skill. And if having such a huge variety of weapons detracts from that at all, it just kind of, I don't know. It definitely is an interesting discussion. And in some ways, I think Battlefield 3 does a really good job of straddling the midline, if that makes sense. Because, the M16, the M416, the AEK, they're really strong. They're definitely the strong, assault rifles. But then you've got other guns like, like the PP-19 or the Spaz, or, all these other guns that, not necessarily the Spaz, but, some of the LMGs, they're just really underpowered, if that makes sense, in comparison. They just don't kill as quickly. And it kind of creates a situation where people can choose them almost as a test of skill. Like, I am so much better than you skill-wise that I can use this troll gun and still kill you, even though you're using an M16 and I'm using a PP-19. I mean, that's really an interesting mechanic and an interesting choice that players can make. So to kind of allow for this gap and not try to make every weapon equally, present, I think it's not a bad choice. But there definitely, I feel like, is some inherent tension between those two paradigms, where you either on one hand have very, very simple but very straightforward, very pure, gun mechanics, whereas on the other end, where you have such a wide and massive amount of customization and weapon variety, that it really adds a lot of spice and a lot of different flavors to the game, and kind of introduces this entirely new mechanic. And overall, I think it's interesting. It's interesting to see the movement that modern shooters are making. But that beat means my pizza's done, so I gotta go eat supper. Good timing, because this commentary's over. I'll see you guys again soon. Bye-bye.